To decode these developments, we're now joined by Tanvi Madan, Senior Fellow at Brookings Institution, also the author of the book Fateful Triangle, How China Shaped US-India Relations During the Cold War. Tanvi, thank you so much for being with us today. What do you think brought India and the US to this juncture where the two leaders could have a phone call?
I think both sides have probably recognized that the other is important to their priorities. I don't think this was necessarily missing on India's side, but clearly President Trump has been persuaded that India is important enough to his own priorities, whether those are his personal priorities, whether those are his strategic priorities, that it's worth trying to stabilize ties and at least try for a more positive view of the relationship. Now we'll see whether that will bear fruit in actual deals, how long this will sustain, for instance. One constant in the Trump administration the first time around, and I suspect this time around, is volatility. So for now, I think this positive momentum is worth taking advantage of while keeping in mind that it is not clear how long it will last.
Right. The wording on the Russia-Ukraine war. The Prime Minister, while thanking Donald Trump, said that India supports US initiatives in ending the Russia-Ukraine war. President Trump went a step further. He said Prime Minister Modi is doing a tremendous job, and then he said that I thank India and Prime Minister Modi for their support in ending the Russia-Ukraine war. He was more direct. What do you think could be the possible understanding that may have been reached over the past few weeks? One thing that we know is that the Indian government, through various channels, had been trying to impress upon the White House and the US administration that we are buying more oil and gas from the US and purchases from Russia are going down.
I don't think this is actually really about oil purchases, though I suspect India will come whether or not it is acknowledged in a way that President Trump might want, or frankly, that there might be objection to in India. I think India will probably find a way to perhaps import less oil from Russia for its own reasons, not necessarily because of US pressure. In any case, India might have other options. It depends on oil prices. That's something India has been consistent on. This cannot be made a matter of strategic autonomy. It's a matter of price at the end of the day. I think this is about actually a role that India might be playing, and it's very hard to tell from the public the role that India might be playing with Russia, with Ukraine, with European leaders, and with the US. I don't know if this has been noticed much, but in both Prime Minister Modi and in External Affairs Minister Jaishankar have either met with or been on phone calls with a number of their counterparts from Russia, from Ukraine, from the US, obviously, but also a number of European leaders, including, for example, the Finnish leader. Each one of those calls has mentioned Russia-Ukraine and the conflict after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We don't know what's going on, but it has been noticeable to me that these have come in a pretty short space of time, about 2 or 3 weeks. So there might be something going on. You know, you asked earlier what is going on that has the impetus for this positive momentum. One possible thing can be that in some of the behind-the-scenes, very careful work that I no doubt think policymakers on both US and Indian sides are doing, is perhaps an Indian indication that they are doing all that they can to get the Russia-Ukraine conflict at least to a ceasefire. And one of the few people who can actually have that conversation with President Putin, importantly, is Prime Minister Modi. Now, it's not clear that President Putin, anything will persuade him other than his own sense, but I don't doubt that part of what Prime Minister Modi discussed with President Putin, including in perhaps that limo ride or that car ride, was the importance of perhaps getting to a ceasefire.
Right. Tanvi, as you speak about President Putin, and I'm just reading a tweet from Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which came a short while back. He has spoken to President Putin, and the Prime Minister thanked him, saying, "Thank you, my friend, President Putin, for your phone call and warm wishes on my 75th birthday. We are committed to further strengthening our special and privileged strategic partnership. India is ready to make all possible contributions towards a peaceful resolution of the Ukraine conflict. This may be said to be a birthday wish only, but how do you see this coming just a few hours after a conversation with the US president?
It's often very hard, other than, years later in hindsight, or when we hear from background sources on what exactly is happening. I will just say it has to be more than a coincidence that from about kind of mid-August, maybe a little later, we have seen these phone calls back and forth, including one after the other, after there have been conversations, after there have been meetings. So I would just say I don't think this would just be necessarily a birthday call. It also might be possible that President Putin wanted to make sure he called since President Trump had called. But I don't doubt that the kind of getting to a resolution of this conflict, which has adversely affected, I don't think it's often recognized, but it has adversely affected several of India's interests. That Prime Minister Modi has been calling for a ceasefire, and there's an Indian interest in a ceasefire. That is consistent with President Trump's position. Now, there could be the side benefit that if this does get to a resolution, would I be shocked if India nominated President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize? For that, no. But I do think this is for India's own reasons, not just because it could get some support or some plaudits from President Trump. I think for India's own reasons, I can see that there would be an interest in working with Russia, working with Ukraine, working with Washington, working with European leaders to get this to an end. Finally, I'll just say there's a fundamental issue at hand here that both Washington has run into under President Trump, but also I suspect Prime Minister Modi is running into, which is that President Putin wants to have a bilateral conversation with the US or maybe with NATO. He does not want to sit down with the Ukrainian leader, President Zelensky. This is not just about President Zelensky. This is about any Ukrainian leader that President Putin does not like. He wants to be able to have this conversation with the big powers as he sees it. But India's position has always been that the parties to the conflict must be at the table, which means Ukraine needs to be there. So I suspect some part of the discussion is about that as well.